A pretext is a purpose or a motive alleged, or an appearance assumed, in order to cloak the real intention or state of affairs.
Initial access. OMI is trying to get into your network.
Listen, this is your manager, and I'm trying to send off an email. I got this document. Need you to confirm a few details. So go ahead and log in and tell me what you think. I need this now, so to make this convenient, here is the link. I'm a threat actor, fishing mark for email is urgent to distract you with it. So how fast you clicked it when you submitted the form with your password in it. You probably couldn't tell there was an actual difference in the URL. The domains look alike though, and to you it looks fine though. Well, mine had typos and make it look like yours. See, I was in the mood today to make your account a communal space, but then you activated your trap card, and I saw you had 2FA, but I just shrugged. I'ma shake it off. Got on kid gloves, I'ma take them off. Got your phone number, I'ma make a call. I'ma break this wall, it just makes me lol. I'm moving quick, I'm on a mission. Yeah, I heard your network is lit. I'm trying to get in. Yeah, I'm trying to get me a hit. When I go fishing. Yeah, you probably think it's legit. I got you clicking. Yeah. Hello. Hi. I'm calling you from the IT department. We have been under attack by some hackers, and we think that your account might be a target.
Oh no, how do I fix this?
No need to worry, I wrote up a ticket. You'll get a notification from your authenticator app, so please pass me them digits.
1 sec.
Okay.
Yeah. The code is 112345.
Thank you. You fell for the lie, so I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. Cutting it short like a crew cut. Probably think it won't happen to you, but it happened to Uber. They say you win some, you lose some. Boys got a smooth touch hacking you too, bruh. You know how I be creeping and I'm logging in your VP, and it probably looks anomalous. Some logs if you be keeping them, and probably unaware about the shares that have been peeping. And the reason I'll be seeking them, I'm looking for an easy win. You probably thought it was a magic trick, and you're mad you clicked. I'ma stack my chips and bet that a DA password is sitting in an admin script. I'm moving quick, I'm on a mission. Yeah, I heard your network is lit. I'm trying to get in. Yeah, I'm trying to get me a hit. When I go fishing. Yeah, you probably think it's legit. I got you clicking. I'm moving quick, I'm on a mission. Yeah, I heard your network is lit. I'm trying to get in. Yeah, I'm trying to get me a hit. When I go fishing. Yeah, you probably think it's legit. I got you clicking.
Hello again, everyone. Hello, and thanks for joining us today. This edition of the Azure Cloud Security Meetup. So if you're wondering the music that's playing, I put the link in the chat window. So that's Clicking by OM1. So we've spoken at this meetup in the past. So if you're yet to see that video, you can check it out. Hello, Ibrahima. How are you doing today?
Hello, David. Hello, everyone. I'm fine, and you?
Yeah, doing good. Thanks, doing good. And we have such an exciting topic today, considering all the changes, that's been happening, right, in the Azure Microsoft ecosystem. Yeah, and you did. I'll be looking forward, because you said you had like a question for Joosua, so I'll be looking forward to to Joosua's answer to the question today. So before we get into the topic today, so if you're yet to join the Azure Cloud Security Meetup group, we encourage you to join the group. I'll put a link in the chat window to the group. So joining the group means you'll be notified whenever we set up other events like this. So Joosua will be speaking to us today. Later, we have Christophe Paracel that will be speaking to us on AI security. So that's coming up. We have Joylyn that will be coming up very soon. Later, I believe that'll be like around end of August. She'll be speaking on supply chain security. So these are very interesting topics that we have coming up. So make sure you join the group so you'll be notified of any upcoming events. Also, I'll put some links in the chat window relating to some of the works that I've done. So in terms of like Azure DevOps preparation course, which is available for free on LinkedIn. So you can check that out if you're into anything related to Azure DevOps. Feel free to check that out. And also, for a few books on Azure security and also on Azure networking. So if that's sort of your thing, again, feel free to check out the books. Okay, so let's introduce our speaker today. So I don't think it needs introduction because he's been here before. Hello, Joshua. How you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for asking.
Yeah. Yeah, awesome. So we're glad to have you back. So again, your session last time was really meaningful and really helpful to people. So we got like lots of positive feedback from that, and we're glad that you're able to join us again. So yeah. So how has this been at Secure Works, by the way? Going okay?
We're doing
Busy?
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're doing great. I mean, as a company and as a person working there, I've had this joke for the whole time I've been working in the security industry that I'm waiting the day I really have to start working with because that day has not arrived yet. So it's like living the dream. Let's put it that way.
Awesome, awesome. And for others that may not know Joshua, so I put the link to his blog in the chat window and to his Twitter account. So make sure you follow him on Twitter. And you can also have him on LinkedIn and again read his blog. He's got some very amazing content there. So you'll be speaking to us today on Azure AD App Security, and then we'll have a discussion. Again, Ibrahima has some powerful questions for you and a very specific one that I'm looking to forward to the answer. So so we'll probably get to that. But yeah, Ibrahima, do you want to go ahead and ask your question, and then we'll let
No,
Joshua get started?
it's more.
Not now. Okay, we'll keep that in later. Okay, yeah. So Joshua.
No, we can start with it, but it's more a joke than a question. So do you plan to rename the tool to Entra ID App Audit?
That is, let's say, likely to have some effect, but no, I think there are many popular tools out there, and the same joke has been running around. So yeah, and I mean that's just the name of the tool. I think there are a bunch of actual endpoints that have references to Azure AD and AAD. So that'll be the real challenge. But for me, it could be like fairly simple thing to do, but not at this time. It's the change is now in PowerPoint. Let's put it that way. Not in the tool.
Awesome. I think that's good enough. I think that's probably what Microsoft themselves have. I think that's
Yes.
that's all
Yeah,
Microsoft has is a PowerPoint and some UI. Okay, so we'll hand over to you, and then we'll come through with the discussion. So for everyone else, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat window, and we'll address them to Joshua. So this will be a very interactive session. We'll be having discussions, and then we'll be asking your questions also. So we'll let you get started, and then we'll come in later.
Yeah, let's start. And I mean, any question you fellows have there in the chat, one of the presenters just shoot me in the middle of the presentation. But let's start from here. So yeah, the subject is the auditing of Azure AD applications. And as was mentioned, there's been a fairly recent branding change. So Microsoft Entra ID, we'll see how we'll use any acronyms from here. I'm not still used to calling MAID, MEID, or going to hybrid Microsoft Entra ID joined. So I'll stick to Azure AD for this session. And yeah, the date is a bit off. I can see. I haven't acquired the skills to do time travel. So anyway, let's go forward. Yeah, and for anyone previously joining, this might be redundant, but there's a short intro of what I've been doing. So I work with SecureWorks. I've been working for several years in the security space. I do tool development and disclose vulnerabilities. I think that's the most of the important stuff here. And here's some recent public disclosures. I can tell that there are more coming this year, unfortunately not before this meeting, but still we have a lot of great stuff in the pipeline. And on the agenda today, and here you can stop me at any point. So, and I'll be stopping for doing some listings. So my idea was to create a tool that will show a couple of very distinctive features of Azure AD applications, which are not available in the signing logs necessarily. They might be available in the portal. So there's a lot of information that you sort of yourself have to correlate. And I've tried to do a lot of that work with this tool here, starting from the app types. So if you go to the portal, you're just able to list under service principals, which are under enterprise applications. You can list Microsoft applications, managed identities, but you do not have an easy way necessarily to tell if the application is a multi-tenant application or if it is your own multi-tenant application. So those things are listed here in the tool with a very simple view. And I'll be showing some of that just in the first examples. Then we'll go through what is this like differences between app and user permissions. There's a lot of them, but the main difference is something we're sticking here. And then we'll go just through the basic listing of granted permissions and also have an idea that what is the difference between adding permissions to Azure AD applications and reviewing the permissions that are actually granted to the service principal object. And I'll do a very short few seconds on the main differences of Azure AD applications and service principals. And well, I'll start with the agenda here. The links, which were already posted in the chat, will be also here part of the presentation. So the application types. Most of the applications should be internal single tenant applications. And in today's discussion, these are mostly about two applications that emit access tokens or ID tokens when they are using the OpenID scopes. Then we might have internal multi-tenant applications. If you are a developer and you serve your own application to a wide variety of users, you might be better suited using the multi-tenant application. So this is an application you've created in your tenant and you've set it as a multi-tenant application. I'll show some of the differences very soon there. But one of the key points here perhaps is that if you're sharing some of your applications to your partners, you might be better off just doing an internal application, which is a single tenant application, and have your partners access the application as guests. So that's something you might be able to find some of your own applications which have been configured as multi-tenant applications, but the use case is basically fully single tenant. So that's a good difference here, which this tool might help you finding. And I think we could jump into the first listing here, showing the app type. And before I jump there, I took this kind of good descriptive difference text talking about the differences between applications and service principals. So basically in Azure AD, every service principal has an application object somewhere. That's the rule number one. If it's a multi-tenant application by an external party, you will just have a service principal in your tenant. And it's very nicely said here that one application object can reference multiple service principals. So basically the Microsoft Graph service principal, which everyone has in their tenant, Microsoft happens to have the original application also in their tenant, which does all of the listings of basically describing roles and such. So when you go to granting those roles in your tenant, you're granting those to the service principal, which is an instance of that application object. And this is the sort of developer's view here. Today I might be speaking kind of about applications and service principals, but mostly I'm talking about the same thing today here. Okay, let's start with the first demo. I'd like to know what of my applications are single tenant, what are managed identities, what are Microsoft applications. So and for this, I'll be sharing my whole screen. So what we'll do here is we'll open the Log Analytics workspace. So I'm demoing this tool here. I'll give some background a bit further, but to kind of get going here, the most beneficial way
Yeah.
is shoot, please.
Yes. Sorry to interject. Sorry. So is it possible to zoom in, zoom a little bit?
Okay.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Yeah, let's share
awesome.
the whole window and zoom into that. So that might work the best way.
Okay.
So,
yeah, awesome. Yeah. And why you're doing that, that's a very, very interesting statement that you made. So in terms of when organizations are looking to, they have their own internal applications and they want external partners,
yeah,
in this case, not customer, but external partners to share, it's best that they do that. So is that because you've seen specific risks relating to the multi-tenant applications?
yeah,
That's
a really good question, and that's the sort of question I'm looking for this session. So the multi-tenant applications are really good if you're doing an application where you do not actually know who's going to be using your application. So, but very often when we talk about partners, we actually have a fairly good idea about those users. So I'll just give an example of one of the benefits. So when you use multi-tenant application, you have to always ensure, like you would probably do everywhere else, but the emphasis is more stronger here. You will be losing one of the defense in depth methods. So when you have a multi-tenant applications, you cannot control via Azure AD who can access those applications. You'll have to do all of that in the application side by either allow listing tenants, or you'll have to do an internal user database allow listing users. And you won't be able to use as a single tenant where you would have the app role assignments, so user assignment, which is a really handy feature. I'll quickly show here what feature I'm talking about. So this is the main feature. This is kind of, I like to talk that this is Azure AD's firewall before token issuance. So when you have a multi-tenant application, you're not able to assign external users to your applications through Azure AD. You'll have to do that in your business logic and code. And you can just guess what that sometimes means. So this button is not working for you. This is like a very simple way to put it here.
Yeah.
A good question.
That's really a very, very powerful point. Yeah, it's a really, really powerful point, because you go through like many organizations, because it's multi-tenant, and multi-tenant means I have a business partner I'm working with in Jackson application, create a multi-tenant app. That's the easy way to go. Yeah, awesome. That's powerful.
Exactly. Yeah.
And by the way, I think that the way I think that the window maybe is a bit minimized, so it's only showing like part of that instead of like the full white. I think it's maybe like in the middle of your screen versus.
Is it any better?
Like
any better now?
Browser window, I think. Yeah. I think that's better now. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll show, and this is the way I designed this the first time, is that you could run it through Cloud Shell. So you don't have to install anything necessary locally. You can do that locally, but Cloud Shell will have Node.js and a bunch of other things, like it will have tokens stored in the session. So it will also handle authentication to this solution. So this is the easiest way to run it. I am aware that even some folks joining here might be mostly working on Azure AD side, so they don't have access to subscription. For that, I have a CSV only mode, which is fairly okay to run when you want to do permissions listing. But this is like the full experience, and this is why I'm demoing this side. So what I'll do here is I'll define the storage account and the application I'm running. All of this is documented, so what I'll do is just run this. And if you're doing this in a large environment, you should be seeing some speed benefits because I'm using the batching endpoint on Graph. And my personal experience is that compared to some previous tooling I've had, this is 10 to 20 times faster. So I'm running this in a honeypot environment of about 1,000 different apps, and I'm running like a list for all individual apps. So I guess this is like more than 2,000 different queries I'm running here. So
yeah,
that's
really, really cool.
That's
And one quick question on that. So
yeah.
for people like running the tool, so any specific permission that's needed to be able to do like the initial data collection?
Yeah.
Or is it like reader permission sufficient, or
reader
is
is
a bit more than that?
Yeah, I mean, and this is like also if you're doing red teaming, this doesn't have to run in your own. I mean, in the tenant, you could run this in a Cloud Shell perhaps, which is like not your own tenant, or you could run this in a separate Cloud Shell, and the target tenant would be different. So what I'm trying to say here is that the data collection is based on just having reader access. So basically, a normal user, like somebody from HR or well, let's just say any user could run AAD internals, which you are probably very many familiar with. This is very similar. What I've done here is a bit of a blue team perspective. So I'm not assuming that you're using this for an adversary perspective, but you could easily run it also as an adversary. But the blue team kind of perspective is that somebody who's looking to prop up, make their defenses better. So that's why you might already have access to storage account. But yeah, for your own sake, whenever you're running third-party code, always use the minimum permissions. That applies to my code as well. So a good question.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And that's awesome.
Yeah. So what I'm doing here is I'm running the SAS tokens to upload the data. So it's just for 1 minute for my demo. So I pasted the data here again. So we were supposed to look at the app type, right? That was the first thing I wanted. And like, this is one of the things that's not available in your basic reporting. And this is something I always missed when I used to do auditing. Like, if I'm go to application side in the portal like this, and I'll take this application here. How do I tell that this is a multi-tenant application like immediately? I don't. I have to go. Yeah. I have to know where I go, and I have to go here and see this value. So, and I mean, it's even harder if you go through the enterprise applications where you are checking the granted permissions. So if I'm going here, this is basically, I wouldn't say impossible, but if you look at the enterprise application, how do you tell that this is a multi-tenant application? I don't know. I don't know. So this is one of the use cases here.
Which is essentially which is a big thing that security people has, which is Azure. The Azure portal was not designed from a security perspective. Like, to your point, from a blue team's perspective, it's like, hey, an admin that wants to do stuff, or if you're someone responsible for security that needs to be able to have visibility very quickly of what are the different app types in my environment, a tool like AAD Auditing tool just makes that easy.
Exactly. Yeah. So a really good point once again. So, and a really simple thing. What I like to know is that when it's an external multi-tenant application, meaning that there's no application object in my tenant. This is basically me as an admin consenting this external application into my tenant, or if my tenant is at the very unfortunate default settings, which is to allow to consent to third-party applications these days to limited scopes requiring verified publishers, then for the applications that are made post 2020. So these would be shown as external multi-tenant applications. And I can do directly filtering here. And this is why I like log analytics. It's like fairly good for doing things you would be doing it with an Excel sheet. So that at least helps me a lot. Let's see how much data. So it will tell me that I have 18 external applications here, and well, you can see that this is a honeypot tenant, so there's an evil app and stuff like that. So yeah, but once again, I want to know the app type. This is like a true multi-tenant application in a sense that it's not even hosted in my tenant as an application, it's a third-party application. Then I could list the ones that are my own applications. So these are something that I am showing to external parties here.
Yep. Awesome.
And
awesome.
Here
So,
are the ones I like truly have as a single tenant applications. So this is like what the most of the applications should be. And then I might have some rare ones where I've configured Azure AD and personal Microsoft account. So how many times have you needed to do a multi-tenant application that allows also personal Microsoft account? I've seen this 0 times. But I've seen this mistakenly configured in the UI because it gives you 3 options. Azure AD for multiple Azure AD organizations, my organizations, or plus Microsoft personal accounts. So this might be something.
And the other parts that I'm looking at there that's super useful also is just right below that you have managed identity.
Yeah. This, by the way, happens to be one of the rare cases you can actually list through enterprise applications, but still, this is like a single place where you can list all of them. And I'll be going later in the demo. I'll also show how you're able to list the Azure Airbag permissions here. I'll have a little story about that. That there was one community member who actually gave me a great feedback. I was not aware that you can list all the Azure Airbag permissions without going to every resource and asking the resource to list them. So these days there's Azure's resource graph, which will hold those permissions. So that saved me like, if in your large environment, that might save you like 30 to 40 minutes of time, because in large environments, you might have like 100 subscriptions and you'd have to go to each resource, ask that which resource scoped permissions you have here. So, but I'll show that a bit later.
Hey Joshua, I have a question. Can you show how these logs are getting to the log analytics? Through Azure AD.
Yes,
for newbies like me.
No, this is not a newbie question. So this is the first question I had to solve with this tool, and actually almost every time somebody asks this, because this is the data I'd love to have available directly in log analytics, like you have in Azure Resource Graph, like applications, list application where app type is managed identity. I'd love to have that natively. Unfortunately, it's not there, so that's the reason why you very often have third-party tools. Such is the case here. So the SAS tokens for this honeypot environment are for about 1 minute. So I'm using an external data query. That's why it requires a storage account. So you see here external data, and then it temporarily uploads this data into storage account, which the log analytics then fetches for the query.
Yeah. And I found that to be super useful, because when I ran it on mine, it's like create a storage account, run the tool, it collects all the information, put it in the storage account. And here's the very good thing about it also, Ibrahima, is that the way that Joshua did it is that it actually gives you the KQL query and say, copy this KQL query,
I think that's the most interesting part.
Yeah, exactly. You just copy it, paste it, and you get all the data and all the analysis that you want to do.
Yeah. I mean, it's I tried to make it easy, but I think there's always a joke about copying stuff. I still want to make stuff easy, and anyone who wants to scrutinize the data, you're very welcome to do so. It's you could always find something, but that's the way to do it. And the reason I'm using storage account here is that for storage account you can easily do a retention policy, so it removes this uploaded data in like 1 day from the storage account. The log analytics will just have like 1 minute of access. So basically, if you're doing this for a customer or yourself, you don't risk necessarily putting that data there without any retention. So the main idea for when I started running this is that I didn't want to be in a situation which you can very easily end up as somebody who's doing an audit, that you leave some data to some log analytics or storage account. So log analytics never stores this data, and neither does the storage account. My previous solution, the way it worked here, had also an automatic retention policy it applied. I might add it here as well. So it will remove this data from the storage account in 24 hours. And log analytics, like I said, it uses the external data, so it will never even have access permanently to this link. It just reads the data from the link, and then it creates a table from it. So, but that was a great question, and that's I always get that question. The best thing.
So we'd like to carry on with that. There is a question in the chat window from Yusuf. So I can ask it. So he said, let me bring that up very quickly. So he says, what about the new feature called App Governance in Defender 365? That cannot also give you all of this information, right?
Yeah. So those features are really great. I haven't seen if they list all the app types or all the permissions or all the credentials, all the owners, all the Azure Airbag permissions, or all the signings, and if they are available without additional licensing. So that's my kind of use case for this.
Got it. Nice. Thanks very much.
I mean, if that helps. But that was a good question. And even personally, I would never do this kind of tool if this information would be available in a single place with all of things I would like to see there. So app governance has some additional features. I'll just add there that it can query some of the graph usage, which I'll be also showing here later. And this will be even cooler when Microsoft releases the Microsoft Graph logs in the future. So you'll be able to check what of these applications are actually doing with the graph permissions. So a good question. And I totally always recommend to use the first party solution. It's just, if you're doing audits, you're very often in a situation where you need a bit more as with this tool.
Nice. Okay, awesome. Yeah, we'd like to carry on. I'm sure that we'll come back with some other discussions.
Let's carry on. I'll share the presentation again. Let's do the entire screen here. So let's go quickly into app and user permissions. So there are some major differences, especially if you're looking them through Graph. So enterprise applications will show them in a single view. But if you look those as an objects, one is app role assignment for OAuth 2 applications, and one is OAuth 2 permission grant. And they might have same values, and they might have also like an admin consent type. So for applications, it's always an admin consent, but for user, it could be a user consent. So this is the difference here. And a good example of how those permissions are used. So if you see an application that has this infamous permission of directory read write, which is you should almost never have an application having those permissions. So for user, it's not that bad because the user still needs to have an Azure AD role to be able to execute those permissions. That's the delegated permission. But if you have an application, that application doesn't require that role. And worst case scenario, that application might be just using a client secret and it's a multi-tenant application. So you're not able to use conditional access to limit that application to, let's say, a single IP. So basically, you might have a 4-character password that is the only thing guarding from some third party destroying your whole tenant. There are some limitations to directory read write, but you can do a lot of damage with those permissions. So this is kind of, if you have applications that have write permissions to directory and they are using client secrets, that's some of the things I want to know immediately, because that's one of the worst things that you would be guarding. And I'll show an example here. So let's take the filtering off here. And this is a good area also for questions if anyone happens to get one. So what I'll do here is I'll do some filtering. I remove the app ID field here. I'll make this also smaller. So what I want to know is the application type first. This would be external multi-tenant applications. And now I want to know what permissions they might have here. So I'll filter with anything that has application or app role. So this one happens to have. This is a multi-tenant application, and it has some fairly nasty permissions, but still they are only for read permissions. But I don't, for example, because this is a multi-tenant application, not in my tenant, I don't know if that
it's
application
an external application that's for another organization. Yeah.
Yes, which happens to be my tenant, and
now
somebody
me
has.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it could have also write permissions, but the worst part is that because it could be using client secret, not a certificate. And the client secret, you don't have a password length limit of, or if you have it, something like 5 or 8 characters. The last time I checked, I was able to give a client secret of monkey or dog's number 5. So like most of those client secrets are automatically created to a really long password, but they might be also leaked to GitHub or anywhere else. Well, obviously a certificate could also be leaked, but when you're using client secret versus the certificate, and if third party is using it, every time that client secret is used, it's passed over the wire. It is obviously HTTPS, but it's passed over the wire. Let's say you have a vulnerable client that is using the app role, and it's passing it through some proxy. So your password, the password to your organization, basically through these app roles, will be then historic part of that proxy's like traffic. And I'm talking about a proxy like a proxy that does HTTPS inspection. So basically, the client is trusting that proxy. And there's a lot of solutions like that, forward proxies. So, but this was just like an evil use case. The key takeaway is here is to do a filtering for the permissions and app type to see external applications that might have application permissions. And the reason was that they don't need a user actively signed in, and they don't require the user's Azure AD roles to perform these operations. They'll be just fine with a single very weak password. So my recommendation is to take a good look into this.
Yeah. That's and that's like a very, very interesting attack path that can be very difficult to hunt down using the portal.
Yes.
In terms of tracing, especially if one is looking at, you have external that's external multi-tenant. Well, it depends on how many one has in the environment. If one has like tons in the environment, it can be difficult to pass through all of that to really filter down to what has, really dangerous permissions in my environment.
Exactly. And I mean, you can do filtering here if for app roles, or you could go, if you like, KQL and ask for the permissions reading object where it includes app roles and is external multi-tenant. So you could do stuff like that to do specific queries. My main purpose here is to get the basic, well, not the basic, but the data I always want in a kind of easy view, and then I even change these queries every now and then to get a bit more data. So okay.
Yeah, and I appreciate that this is like a tool that you created from the perspective of the blue team.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I can see a lot of like red team applications there in terms of uncovering some of those attack paths.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I sort of like to think that this is a blue team tool, but if I'd be tasked with red teaming and I have just reader permissions, bear in mind, I don't need to have storage account in the victims tenant. I don't need to have storage log analytics in the victims tenant. I just need to be able to query the graph from the victims tenant and format this data wherever I want. So that's awesome. And then I can go through a check for, well, I'll show one of my favorite examples once we're closer to the end. So
awesome.
like a really
powerful. So that's another good pointer to the audience. So run Joosua's tool, run the AAD app audit tool, and check your environment where you have external multi-tenant applications that have a very sensitive permissions in your environment. So you can just do like a combination of what Joosua has done to uncover that. So thanks for sharing that here.
No problem. So user assignment, we kind of talked about this, but it's a very important thing to have. So if you have a SAML application, user assignment is always required. But if it's not a SAML application, unfortunately, user assignment is not the default. I strongly think that it should be the default value. So let's see what we have here. I'll take the last filter off, select all. Okay, and let's have a look for the user assignment. So app role assignment required. So I'll just add it here. Okay, I'll just refresh the external data. Like I said, it's just for 1 minute here. So what I basically did is that I have a schema in the upper part of the KQL, and I added one of the attributes I want to be checking here. So let's see, app role assignment required. You can see most of them are false. So I have 1,000 app which I'm auditing. I'll take the ones which are true, and that's a really bad number of 82. And if I check the ones which are false, it's majority of the apps. So this is unfortunately what I expect to see in customer environments as well, where there are a lot of OAuth 2 apps. If it's just SAML apps, then the default is enforced, and nobody's ever complained about that default. So I'd love to see this same default for OAuth 2 applications, where the user assignment is required, where the Azure AD kind of acts as a firewall before it issues the token. So the user needs to be assigned in Azure AD to the application. So
it's not so, but for like non-SAML apps, that's going to essentially, it's going to allow authentication from any user. So what you're saying?
From any user in your tenant when it's an internal application.
Internal.
Yes. When it's an
but if it's like
multi-tenant, then it's
go ahead.
If it's a multi-tenant application, it will allow authentication from any Azure AD user.
Yeah. So because that requirement is not enforced by
it cannot be.
So that's a very interesting one. Is there any particular reason that you think why Microsoft went with that default to say, Oh, like we're not going to allow that is not exposing the ability to allow people to enforce, user assignments. Is there any reason why they went without default? Is that a technical limitation or
Like if
they
yeah, I mean that's $1,000 question. I've never heard even anyone speaking about this setting, and this is like I just tell if I'm doing anything that has like a red teaming work, this is one of the first things I check. I check especially for Azure functions, which do not require user assignment, because it means that any developer who's gone through the like fire and forget enabling for their own function, they don't understand that it will create app like this that doesn't require a user assignment. So unless they have created their function to have code that checks me, the function middleware, which is called easy auth, at least used to be, it will be just gladly giving me a pass. So this is like, and you can list those functions using this application. So if you were an adversary, you would list those functions and then you would check if they require app role assignment, which 99% do not require, meaning that their function might expose some very delicate business logic of that organization. So
that's a very interesting one. Thanks very much for sharing that. That's
I mean, I cannot have enough emphasis on having user assignment required, and I don't understand why people don't speak more about this setting, because it's like it's an Azure AD firewall which you can have for your own apps very easily enabled. Unfortunately, for the most popular app type, most popular for me CO2, it's not enabled by default. So yeah.
Got it.
Good,
nice.
Good discussion.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. Ibrahim, I think that someone has a question in the chat window.
Yes.
Let me see.
Let me check.
Yeah.
What are the precautions to take when registering external application in your environment, especially avoiding assigning airbag rules to applications?
Yeah, so I mean, if it's an Azure, yeah, this is a really good question. I'm not sure if I'm answering it properly, but yeah, if it's an Azure AD role, there is almost never a reason for application to have one of those. And well, you can list them here by showing application roles. And obviously, if it's an external application which you're adding through the consent dialog, it actually cannot have direct Azure Airbag permissions as an application, because it needs to be added as an Azure Airbag object under the Azure subscriptions IAM. But if the question is regarding the Azure AD roles, the consent dialog cannot add admin role, but it can add scopes, application permissions that are very similar to having an AAD admin role. So like you can have multiple ways to have the application have too much power. And still you could also have a delegated permission for an application, like this application is for example just wanting your signing information, and it wants to impersonate you as to Azure management. That's a huge red flag immediately. So that could be like an evil way to get access to Azure Airbag with the user's tokens to get delegated permissions to Azure management. So, and once again, I'm not sure if I answered the question, but I tried something. So, and good question nonetheless.
Yeah. Thanks. We'll let you carry on.
Yeah, no problem. And this is the best format, having these questions here. So, and yeah, let's go to the kind of next part, which I like, is basically showing, which I get very often questions. So when you go into the applications in the portal, like here, and you go into the app registration, and I see many people checking their app permissions like this. So they go into the app registration. I'll take one of these, which happens to have some permissions added. I think this is a good one. Well, let's see if I still have something else. Let's see if this app is still present. I think it should be. Yeah, this is a managed identity. So this is not a good example, but this might be, or this one. That's a managed identity as well. Well, this is not. Yeah. So this view you have here, which shows this, might have permissions that are not actually granted. And that's why I always like to check the permissions from the service principal side. And that's basically going here and listing permissions. So this means that these are the permissions that have been actually given. Because the previous view might also have permissions that do not have admin consent. They are just listed under required resource access. So I got once questioned that why I don't list them in the tool by default. And the reason I'm not listing them that they are not effective. You know, the effective permissions you only know from the permissions that are granted to the service principal. Required resource access might list permissions that are not granted. So that's why it's not the best source of truth. But still, it's exposed here. You can check it. Also part of this list, I added like a picture basically here where you have required resource access and then you have permissions reading, which is under the service principal. And one of the most important parts is that users can dynamically ask more permissions that are defined under the required resource access. So that's one of the reasons why I don't trust it, because you could have a user that does a dynamic consent to a permission that is not listed in the required resource access values. So I don't trust that value in the same way for auditing that I would trust the permissions granted to a service principal. That's an important distinction for me, and it basically means that when I investigate permissions, even if I'm doing them through the portal, I don't go through here, but I go always through the service principal object, which is here.
Yeah.
So, and in the report it looks like this. So
yeah. And that is what is exposed as permissions reading
yes,
here.
exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. So,
Yes.
and a good question. There is you can add there required resource access only present on applications. So, a good example is that when you are using required resource access, if it's a multi-tenant application that is externally added, you won't even have it here, because that information is only available in the developer's tenant. You'll only see the granted permissions. So you'll probably get an idea why I don't primarily read that information. I read only the information that is effectively granted. That being said, there could be a malicious use case where there's a long list of permissions there. So you could always want to check those. But if you want to see what's actually effective and like being used in terms of having those permissions there, check the service principal side.
Correct. Nice.
Let's go a bit forward.
Very useful.
Yeah. Let's see what, this is one of the things why I do like having this in the log analytics space. So if you run this tool in a log analytics space where you also store the signing logs, you can correlate the signing events to see when was the last time this application was active. And this is, I believe, something that Azure recommendations and Azure App Governance might also give you, and it's a very important information. So like I said, if you can have that information from a first-party application, good for you. If you don't, this might be another choice. So
and from an active perspective, is that talking about last time that
yes,
successfully authenticated or a template? Yeah. Oh, that's very
actually.
useful.
You could add a filter there. I'll show the query because that's a good distinction for the question. So I'll show here. So basically what it adds here is just any type of, so I'm also interested about failed signing because it could mean that there's an automation that is hammering the application. And it's failing all the time, and the application logic actually might be dependent on that failure. So if the application fails, it goes to step B. So now if the application like cannot even get the error message, or it gets a different error message, then the application might go to another fallback procedure. So to me, it's kind of important knowing failures and successful logins. That being said, you could filter the result type or result code to 0 here, which I think is the successful login. So, but hey, let's add this one. We have, I think this is our last kind of a short demo we could run here. So, what I'll do is I'll just prepare this query in my own view, which will have the external data appended here. Let's see what we get. Yeah, we do definitely get some data. So let's go a bit below. So now we could sort, like, when was the last time generated? Obviously, you're going to be limited to how long your logs go. And if you're storing non-interactive logs, you might not want to have more than 90 days. From a security perspective, it's really good to store them for a longer time. You could store them beyond 90 days to storage account. But this is if you want to do correlation. And for any organization that has a lot of Azure AD applications, this information, even if it would be just 1 month, it's very useful. Because I think that's what the Azure AD recommendations will be also showing. Are there signings in the last 30 days? And well, obviously, this is a honeypot environment. So I had to increase it to 300 days. And the last 30 days, I have maybe 20 unique apps or something. So this is one of the use cases. I have one also for auditing. It will list what operations it has done in Azure AD logs. And I think we're 1 minute to closing in, but should I do that demo?
This is yeah, so that would be really good. So one of the things that what you just showed now in terms of this, I didn't, when I was just testing, I didn't even like notice that essentially this is like a entitlement management type capability for applications in Azure AD.
Yeah.
To be able to see, like, maybe if you have like dormant apps that's not authenticated in a long time,
Yeah,
that maybe you can clean
exactly.
up.
And
That's
you could
also
also, instead of max time generated, you could do a list of count of unique users who are using the application. So, I mean, you could also use it that way. You could just add it there as another column. So I'm mainly just getting the interesting data here, but whatever you can do with the signing logs and Custo language, that's the true limitation. So you can do quite a lot with that. Let's add the last one here, which is running the data with audit logs, and this is one of my favorite ones. It might not be useful for everyone, but it exposes some really interesting information. This is like the small piece, and like when I check these applications, I also want to know what Microsoft is doing. So this is like the most coolest one you can check. So just bear with me a minute. I'll prepare the query. Let's hope this works. I transferred this from a previous project. So if you're in a large environment, you'll be seeing your own applications, but you can now also check what Microsoft is doing with their first-party applications, and this is super interesting to me. So let's start by selecting just managed identities and Microsoft applications. What are they doing in the sign-in logs? So I'll take Devis registration service, and I'll do some sorting. This is a really cool feature in Custo. So let's sort by operation. or let's sort by display name. So you can here see that domain controller services has 3 operations. This is the Azure AD domain services, I guess. And let's see what the operation value is here. Just a second, I'll take the operations here. Yeah, here's, well, add application. Let's filter this a bit. So what I might do is I reduce some of these columns here. Let's remove this one and let's take that away and let's filter by the domain services. Yeah, so domain controller services, let's see what it is doing. Yeah, and I need to also filter the ones that are, yeah, what I didn't do is I didn't filter the ones that are doing some actual operations. So this was a short live debugging. So now I have one that has an operation. So let's check it here. And yeah, it adds an application, adds an owner to application, removes the service principal. So yeah, you might find some interesting stuff. This is something you might not be able to control, but if you want to learn how some of the Microsoft's own applications work, this might be a good place to do it. So this is like interesting to me.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's definitely.
And I think I
definitely.
I think I had some more filtering here. So just bear with me. I'll update a small piece of this data.
Yeah.
And I'll go.
So by the way, one of the questions, while you're doing that, one of the questions that's come up is like the slides.
Yeah.
Is this something that will be shared?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Nice.
Let's run this again and let's just see if I'll be able to remove the filtering, because the filtering is adding something. So yeah, now let's go back. Let's check the ones that are adding other applications. This is interesting. So let's remove the empty ones here. This was what was gonna be doing. And here's Azure app number 5. So this is a third-party application. This is one of my honeypot applications, and it's updating users. So I can tell that this is a malicious use case here. And yeah, this is something you might want to check. So if you have application that has read-write permissions to Microsoft Graph, but it's not doing any operations that are being logged or won't be showing operations in the future using the Microsoft Graph logs, then it might not need those permissions. So that's why you want to actually correlate with the audit logs. And this is not part of the audit logs, but this was one of the most important things here. So, and this is something I've seen in every tenant, a dangling redirect URI. So if I'm an adversary, I go into this as a normal user, I get to list all their functions and Azure websites.net addresses, which might be many in an Azure focused organization. I'll try to find all of the Azure website names which are unclaimed. So basically they will have an Azure AD application that is still having it as a valid token redirection URI, but it's not anymore registered in their Azure websites service, which might be a function. So what I'll do is I register the name by myself, and then I'll put the users, give the users a link, and they will do single sign-on to that service, and I'll get authorization code or access token for those users.
Just harvest their tokens, and then you have the tokens that you can use for the activity.
So this is something that's like really important, because when you remove app service, it doesn't automatically go and remove the reference in the Azure AD application. It's not like a managed identity. So, and these I see these all the time. And these are like, if you have somebody who can read these, they're gonna have a field day.
So hold on. So does this happen for manually, for those manually registered one, or the ones that are registered maybe using like the easy auth
Yes,
process?
yes,
Or is this
exactly. This is
yeah?
like
Oh,
this
wow.
comes automatically. So once you've enabled the easy auth, it will add those.
Yep.
The default experience will add those Azure websites redirect URLs.
And then it does not remove them
No.
when you delete the
No,
app.
it doesn't.
Wow, that's
let's say I've used it many times
yeah.
from the perspective of finding a malicious way into a tenant.
Yeah.
Is
that something that you've recommended to Microsoft? I'm curious about it. Like, if you recommended to Microsoft, because that seems like something that they should probably look into cleaning up once you clean up the app also, and clean up the identity that was created as part of the
I think the answer is that the user who,
yeah.
I mean, the user who might be cleaning the app is necessarily not the user who created it, so they need to have permission to modify the app registration, which they might not have.
Mm-hmm.
So this might be also an engineering challenge, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be auditing these like one of the number one things you'd be doing. So yeah, now like I said earlier, this is something I've discovered in many audits. I've kind of shown that this is the way inside your tenant. So if there's a single user, like somebody gets just a listing of these applications, they can then set up their own malicious version of this application because it's not anymore used by your organization, and they will start redirecting your users for authorization codes or access tokens for the permissions that are listed here, which might be plenty. So
wow. That's awesome, man. I'm not sure what Ibrahima is thinking, but this has really like opened up like my eyes to like seeing things, in some aspect. My mind wasn't even thinking like in that direction. That's like what happens.
Yeah.
So basically,
super useful.
If you are a security guy who is working on Azure AD, you don't need to sleep.
Yeah.
So you
that is the unfortunate reality.
You have to clean up.
Yeah. That is
basically you need to have let's say a way to manage the life cycle of all your apps. So.
Yeah, exactly.
And this tool, again, the power is it just brings all of this together. And I like the approach that you've taken, Joshua, to this, which is you're taking like all this information that you're getting from like your own research and then surfacing that. Is there any way like for people to like sort of like support, contribute to what you're doing at all?
Yeah. I mean, you can open, and that's a good question. You could open just an issue. You don't need to do the pull request and merge and forks and stuff. I mean, you could do that. I actually have one of the features was added by a community contributor here because they didn't want to use storage account keys. They wanted to use Azure SDK for authenticating the storage. So they actually added the code part, and I approved the pull request. But you could just add an issue. You could go to GitHub into the link which is shared there and just open an issue for an idea, and that'll work. So that's the very easy way. Nice. You could reach out to me or anyone basically here hosting and for an idea. It doesn't need to be me. It could be David or Ibrahima as well, and you could see if there are any use cases. And this is still a tool I've used. It might contain a lot of bugs. So if you find a bug, just ping me and I'll try to reproduce it. That's always possible. And that's something you get when you develop tooling.
Yeah. Cool. Man, this was very useful. It's sad that we ran out of time, but again, for me, it's super
useful. Just one last question about
yes.
So, okay, you run the tool, you have your... So what's wrong, in fact? But what do you recommend for the remediation phase?
So what do you recommend for what? Sorry, I didn't get there.
The remediation. So you have something wrong, you need to fix it. What steps I need to do to do the
so
effective
it depends
remediation?
kind of what you're doing. Let's say that it's a multi-tenant application. You see that it hasn't been signed in a 30 days, but I mean, you could, for example, disable it first. So it stops issuing new tokens. And then when the screen test period is gone, you could remove it. You can also use various PowerShell script to remove individual permissions. That's one thing. You could also delete applications. So the mitigations are something that you'll be doing directly to the either service principal or the application, depending if it's a multi-tenant or internal application. And yeah, that's a really good question. Mostly I've been in a position where I showed the problem. I know that it's always a second challenge to actually fix it. So sometimes it's easier to be in this position of just showing the problem.
Yes.
Then the hard questions come.
Yeah.
Somebody has to be able to sleep after they remove the application, like David said.
Okay.
So
Yeah. Yeah, really appreciate your time today, Joshua. Really, really appreciate it. Again, as always, like
it was great session.
yes,
Very
good
insightful.
session. Yes. Yeah, thanks very much for that. So again, to everyone else, if you have any questions or any comment, feel free to reach out to Joshua. I've added like information. I also put it like in the description of the YouTube video, so you should be able to get it from there again. But this is where we'll stop for today, and then we'll pick things up from there next time. Again, thanks very much for a very, very insightful session. I'll definitely be watching this video again, and I'll playing around with the tools. And I'm sure at some point I'll probably write some blog posts in terms of like what I've learned using the tool. So thanks very much for that. Thanks very much again, Ibrahim, for joining also.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thanks everyone.
Bye.
Bye for now.
Ciao.
Bye.